Welcome our next speaker, Saldanha. Saldanha has been involved with Neuro Linguistic programming internationally for almost 25 years and heads ClassNLP.com as a founder, trainer and organizer. ClassNLP.com provides NLP training at all levels in India, and he's also the founder of the Indian Professional Association of NLP. Now, Charles' vision for Indians is to set the benchmark for NLP education and application that the rest of the world can only aspire to. Charles has been taught by the originators of NLP and regularly brings some of the best trainers in the world to India so that Indians can benefit from their experience in their own country. So in recognition, he has recently been made a regional co-director in India for the Association of IEMT Practitioners, which is Integral Eye Movement Therapy. He resides in Goa and he carries out all his operations from here. So, presenting Charles, who will take you through his session on NLP for Wellbeing.
Good afternoon. That was a marathon session, panel discussion. How are you feeling after that? Good. I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to the World United Doctors and Healers Association, and especially to Daryl and his team who've made this possible over this weekend. And I'd like to thank you for coming and giving your weekend up to listening to all the different speakers here. I'll start with something that one of the creators of NLP stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. One of the creators of NLP, at the beginning of each of its trainings, says that, asks the participants to take any books they've read on NLP, anything they've heard about NLP, any conversations they've heard about NLP, and forget it, to throw it away literally. And just to be in the moment and experience what you're experiencing now from what is being told to you today. I'd like to start also, I'd like to tell you about a man, a Spanish man, a Spaniard, a guy called Pablo Casals. He was around not so long ago, and he was well known throughout the world. He was well known for a number of things, but especially that he was an absolutely brilliant musician. He was an absolutely superb cellist. He played the cello, and he played it all around the world. He was called for performances in all parts of the world, and he travelled extensively. Now, Pablo Casals played his cello literally up until the time of his death, and he lived to a very old age. In his 90s, he gave one of his last performances, a solo performance. I believe it was Carnegie Hall in New York. And on the day of the concert, all the well-to-do people came in. The ladies were dressed in beautiful evening gowns. The men were dressed in their bow ties. They all started to come into the tiered seating in the hall. And at a certain point in the evening, just as the performance was about to begin, the lights dimmed. And as the lights dimmed, the conversations throughout to all of the audience quietened down until it was silent and dark. The only light was the light on the stage. And right in the center of the stage was one single metal folding chair, as the musicians would sit on. From one side of the stage, a beautiful young lady appeared in a beautiful evening gown. And on her arm, she was carefully escorting the very aged, in his mid-90s, Pablo Casals. And Pablo Casals was shuffling very slowly, hardly breathing. His hands were down at his sides, his head was down. And there seemed to be hardly any sign of life as he very slowly shuffled to the center of the stage where the chair was. The young lady helped him to sit into the chair, and she left. From the other side of the stage, a young man appeared, very well dressed with his bow tie on, very carefully and reverently carrying Pablo Casals' cello and bow. And as he approached Pablo, he put the instrument on the ground and carefully positioned it between the old man's legs and put his left arm on the neck of the instrument, and in his right arm he put the bow. And as they'd been quite concerned about him up until then. They could hardly see any sign of life in him. And they waited with bated breath. After a few moments, Pablo Casals began to play. And he played one single, solitary, continuous note. The audience were a little confused, but Pablo Casals continued to play this one single, solitary, continuous note. And as he continued to play and continued to play this one single, solitary note, the audience began to understand what was happening. For anyone to play one single, continuous, solitary, perfect note on this instrument would take someone who is a genius. And he continued to play, and the audience really appreciated what he was doing. And just as suddenly as he started, he stopped. His bow hovering over the strings of the instrument. And after a few moments, he began to play his set pieces. He played them one after another, after another. And as an old man, in fact, for anybody at any age, this would be quite a considerable effort to play a solo performance. But he played for over an hour, maybe even an hour and a half. And as he played through all of his set pieces, he took the whole audience through the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, through every single emotion you could think of, through the depths of despair and sorrow, anguish, anger, frustration, adventure, excitement, even happiness, joy, sweetness. He took them through every single emotion you could imagine. Just one little old man sitting on a stage with one instrument. And as suddenly as he started playing, he stopped. And as soon as he stopped playing, his bow slipped down. His head again bowed. There was hardly any sign of life in him. The young man came from the side of the stage and carefully took the instrument and took it off the stage. The young lady came back and carefully escorted Pablo Casals from his seat to the side of the stage. And as he shuffled towards the side of the stage, the audience were all on their feet, applauding, clapping, shouting, screaming. They were so appreciative of what they'd just heard. Pablo Casals hardly even acknowledged them, maybe with the tips of his fingers. And he went off the stage. They called for encore after encore after encore. Of course, this man was so old, he got into his car and went home. And it's interesting when we see people like Pablo Casals, a genius at what he does. And of course, in all areas of our lives, we see geniuses. We see people who play cricket on the streets, the little kids who play cricket on the streets. Some will play for school, some will play for their college, some will play for the States, some will play for India itself. And these people who play for their country, they're amongst the top cricketers in the world. And yet, even amongst them, you will find a handful which excel even beyond any of those players, the geniuses, in every single aspect of life, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in business, whether it's in the stock market, whether it's in agriculture. You'll always find someone who is way, way better than anybody else. And this is where NLP comes in. They ask the question, with someone like Pablo Casals, who's been playing his instrument for almost 90 years, do we have to go through 90 years of experience in order to become as good as him? And they wondered if there was maybe some patterns in his behavior that they could extract and find out what was it specifically that made him a genius in that area of his life. What makes someone a genius in terms of business? What makes someone a genius in terms of agriculture? And this is essentially what NLP is. It's a way of modeling or extracting the strategies of geniuses. NLP is often called the study of excellence. And it's been made famous because a lot of the early practitioners went on and looked for the best people in the world in order to model them. However, the creator of NLP, John Grinder, says that each and every one of us genius inside of us. And if we look at each other, we'll find that. Maybe someone makes a cake better than anybody else. Maybe someone is a better wife than anybody else. Someone is a better father, better husband, better brother, a better friend. Some people turn to anger very quickly, whereas others, you notice, something will anger them and within a second they've forgotten it. That's something of behaviour that we could use. We can model that and use it in ourselves, replicate it in ourselves. And this essentially is what the developers of NLP did. And this is where there's a confusion between NLP, which is a process of modeling, and therapy. The first people that the creators modeled were the great therapists at the time, who were at the beginning of the 70s. Therapists would work with a client, the client would come along for a number of sessions, the therapist would talk to them, and all of a sudden they seemed to be miraculously cured. No one could understand what it was that was going on that created that cure. Bandler and Grinder, the creators of NLP, were interested in this. So they used this process of modeling to take some of the best therapists of the time, people like Frank Farrelly, the creator of provocative therapy, Moshe Feldenkrais, which I'm not quite sure what his therapy is, but it's essentially realigning all the muscles and the bones in the body. People like Virginia Satir, who was a great family therapist, Fritz Perls, who is the father of Gestalt therapy, and Milton Erickson, who is known as one of the greatest hypnotherapists that they ever were. They modeled these therapists and they extracted exactly what they were doing with each of their clients. And they actually created a number of models of therapy, which they then taught to other therapists. And in fact, when they modeled the therapists, even though they were essentially not from a background of therapy, they were able to get results with clients faster than the original therapists that they modeled, because they removed all the unnecessary information. One of the things I think that what we might call the killer app, the application that put NLP in the headlines, was what was called the fast phobia cure. And what Bandler and Grinder did was look at the therapist and say, well, what are they doing to cure people of phobias? And in those days, it would take many sessions, even months and years, before therapists could actually cure a person of a phobia. What Bandler and Grinder did, they said instead of looking at the phobia, what causes the phobia, how is the phobia created, they said, well, let's look at the solution. So they put an advert in the paper, and they asked for people who'd had phobias before and had gotten over them to come in. So they had about 100 people who had phobias and no longer had them, and they interviewed them one at a time. And they found that there was a pattern, that all of them had done exactly the same thing in order to remove their fear. What they did then is they put it into a process and they applied that to people who had phobias, and they found that those people would lose their phobias within a few hours. They then streamlined the process and got it down to an hour. So now, instead of spending years in therapy, they could remove a phobia within an hour, and they called it fast phobia cure. And this might not seem very impressive today, but in those times when therapists seem to be doing magic, to be able to extract that magic and be able to teach it to anybody, literally, they could take someone off the street, give them a script on the fast phobia cure, put them in front of a phobia, and that person, without knowing any therapy, could cure the person of a phobia. So this is how robust the models became. And they created a lot of models from these therapists, and then they taught other therapists who weren't very effective. They taught them these techniques. They could go back and use them on their own clients and get results very rapidly, very quickly, very successfully, and the results would hold for a long time. And this is essentially the start of NLP. it was modelled from therapists, taught to therapists, and then they realised that these models were not only useful in therapy, they were useful in all areas of life. One of the first models was the meta model, which was a model for using language to clarify language. So to get the client very specific about what the problem was, so the therapist knew what they were dealing with. Now, if you think about it, this could be used in business to be very clear about what the deal is going to be, very clear about what the industrial issue is going to be, even in terms of family, parents working with their children, to be very clear about what's happening with the child. So these models now became generative. They could be used in all sorts of contexts. They could be used in personal interactions, they could be used in business interactions, they could be used in therapeutic interactions, they could be used virtually in any area of life. So lots of people from business, from their personal lives, lots of people became interested in NLP, and it kind of grew exponentially. But essentially, NLP is the process of modeling. It's not the therapeutic techniques. Those are the results of NLP modeling. One of the things that I do, I'm very interested in modeling lots of different areas. And one of the things I do is model some of the more successful therapists, the more experienced therapists. I find some very interesting ways that they deal with clients compared to how I see other people dealing with clients. I have a great guy, I think you know him, Andy Austin, comes over from the UK and he teaches in India. He taught here in Goa last year or the year before, and he'll be here again in September next year. And he has a wonderful story that gives you an idea of how he works with clients differently to the way some other people work with clients. So he has this lady that calls him up. He works at home. He has a room which is specifically his office where he sees clients. But the client will call him up at home, make an appointment, and then appear at his front door, and he'll show them into the office and work with them. So he had one lady that called him up. She made an appointment, booked a specific time, turned up on time. The doorbell rang, ding dong. So Andy went, opened the door. There's this woman standing there, and all of a sudden her face changes. And he slams the door in the face. Now, if you're a therapist, or even if you're not a therapist, it sounds quite an abrupt thing to do to your client. So he stands there waiting for a moment. After a few moments, ding dong, bell rings again, opens the door, she's standing there a little confused, and then all of a sudden, bang, closes the door in the face again. And stands there waiting for a few more moments. Again, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Opens the door and she's a little bit frustrated now, you can see it in her face. And then, bang, again, shuts the door in the face. And waits patiently. Bang, 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 again, kicking the door, everything. He opens it. He said, "What do you think you're doing? I've turned up for my appointment on time." He said, "That's better. That's a state I can use. Come in and we can begin to work." Confusions with NLP is what NLP stands for. And it was actually just a list of words that Bandler gave to Grinder. One was Neuro Linguistics, and Bandler liked that to kind of brand what they were doing. And John Grinder said, well, there's already a field of Neuro Linguistics. So being a computer programmer, Richard Bandler tagged on programming and became Neuro Linguistic programming. Some people explain it as neuro, meaning the neurology, how our brain works, linguistics, the language that we use and how that affects our experiences, and programming, as in our habits. When we get up every morning, we brush our teeth, we have the same cereal every morning. So let's say we have cereal and milk every morning, and we listen to Daryl, and we want to change that program. We don't want to do it automatically, just put our bowl and put the milk and the cornflakes in. We want to maybe eat some fruit, become more healthy. We have to change that program, that habit. And then the following morning, the morning after, maybe it's a little fruit instead of the cereal. But after we've done it a number of times, I think someone said 20, 21 times, it becomes a habit. We've created a new program. In terms of the language, there's a very nice story. A little boy, 6 or 7 years old, a guy named Babu. He's sitting playing on the floor with his cars, and his mother is sitting close to him, reading a book. And every now and then, Babu looks up and he sees this book, NLP. So eventually he gets a little curious and he says, "Mummy, what's this book you're reading, NLP?" She says, "Well, Babu, you're a 6-year-old boy, and this is quite a lot for me to take in. It's going to take me a little while to figure out exactly how to explain to you what this is that I'm reading. So please go to the porch. Your grandfather's sitting out there. Please see how he is. And while you're chatting with him, I'll think of how to explain this to you." So Babu loves his grandfather, so he goes running out to the porch. His grandfather's sitting there in the rocking chair, rocking back and forth. Babu tucks his shirt sleeve, and the grandfather looks down to see Babu and says, "Hi, Babu, what are you doing?" Babu says, "Mummy sent me to see how you are. How are you today, Grandpa?" Grandpa said, "Well, I'm a very old man. I've got aches and pains and arthritis and rheumatism. I've got no teeth." Babu said, "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that, Grandpa." So he rushes back into his mother and he says, Mummy, Grandpa is a very old man. He's got no teeth and he's got aches and pains and he's got all sorts of problems, rheumatism and things like this." So his mum says, "Okay, give me a few more minutes, please. Go to your grandfather and ask him, how are things when he was your age?" Babu says, "Oh, that's interesting. I'm going to find out from Grandpa how things were." So he runs back to Grandpa. Grandpa, tell me some stories. What were you doing when you were my age?" Grandpa, all of a sudden, a big smile comes across his face. He says, "Oh, when I was your age, we used to run through the fields. We used to climb the trees. We used to play cricket and football. We used to steal the apples from the farmer's tree next door. And he'd chase us, and we had such fun. It was so wonderful." So Babu runs back inside to his mother and tells her all this. "Oh, Grandpa used to steal the apples from the tree from the farmer next door. And he used to run away." And his mother said, "Babu, now I can tell you what exactly NLP is." She says, "When you went to Grandpa first time and you asked him how he was feeling like an old man. And the second time you asked him what he was like when he was your age, and he was so full of energy." She says, "That's what NLP is. Just being able to change a person with a few words." Okay, is there any questions?
So, Charles, would you like to give any information, the location of your institute or any upcoming programs? So, is that?
I'm not very commercial. I don't have business cards or flyers, so I guess my carbon footprint is pretty good. I just have the classnlp.com. It has my phone number, my email, my Skype, Facebook, all of that sort of stuff. There's lots of information on there, and if you need to contact me, all my details are there. So all you need to remember is classnlp.com, and all the information is there. Are there any questions?
NLP appears to be consisting of a big toolbox of tools taken from different therapies. For example, communication, subconscious communication is a big topic in NLP. And then hypnotherapy is also a big topic in NLP. So are there any correlation between all these tools which are taken into NLP?
Yeah, and NLP is nothing new. It's not a unique field of study. It is taken from a number of other fields, from epistemology, from anthropology, from physiology, even now more recent fields of study like neuroscience are coming into it to explain how we actually do what we do, how the brain actually processes information. So yeah, NLP is not a unique field of study. It's pulled from a whole bunch of different fields of study. Gregory Bateson was instrumental in a lot of the ideas that helping Bandler and Grinder with a lot of the ideas. And John Grinder, to this day, I trained with him 2 years ago. He's still a acknowledges the input from Gregory Bateson to be invaluable in creating the field of NLP, so it's not new. In terms of hypnotherapy, they did a lot of work with Milton Erickson, modeling him, and I think one of the problems when they were working in California at that time was that the law was you couldn't administer hypnotherapy without being a licensed hypnotherapist. So some of the techniques are actually hypnotherapy techniques, but because they called them an NLP technique, they were able to do hypnosis without contravening the laws at the time. And an interesting story that Bandler actually went to Scotland to do some workshops. And Scotland doesn't recognise hypnotherapy as anything. And yet the place he went to give the talk banned him from teaching hypnotherapy. So he said, well, how can